Maybe you've heard before that there are some Christians who believe in something more or less called the prosperity gospel. And the basic tenet is that if you are doing well, financially well, physically well, health-wise, all the rest, then you're blessed by God and you must be going on the right path of life. And the opposite would then be if you're not healthy, if you're not doing well financially, all the rest, then you must have done something wrong. And I'm not here to badmouth anybody who believes that, but I am here to say that, first of all, it comes from a historical perspective if you read the Old Testament pretty closely. Think particularly to the book of Job, where he is well blessed. He has a big family, he has lots of livestock, he has good health, and then all of that is taken away. And then for the next 30 or so chapters, he argues with his friends about why he doesn't have all the good things anymore. And his friends say, it's because you sinned. And he says, I didn't. And they go back and forth 30-something chapters until at the end of it, God says, I am who I am, basically, and he finally restores everything that Job had lost, and then some. But in today's gospel, we've got that age-old question that comes up. There's this blind man, and the disciples ask, whose sin is it, his or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answers the question very simply. It's neither of their faults. This is for the glory of God. That's the frustrating thing about the problem of evil. Whenever we're suffering something, Ignatius would say we have to be very careful about where the source is coming from. It could be because of our personal sin. There's plenty of that. But it could also be that the Lord is leaving us to our natural powers in order to test us and to let us be strengthened through that experience, or because he's offering us an opportunity to say, which one do I love more? The good favors that God gives me, or God himself? Do I love God only when he gives me good things, or do I love God even when I'm suffering? That's the beautiful thing about this man born blind. And I think any of us who have had a conversion experience through suffering. Because when this man who's lived his whole life blind is now able to see, he's refuting the Pharisees without even thinking about it. They're trying to catch him in some sort of ruse or try to make him say that Jesus is the Messiah so they can kick him out of the synagogue or whatever else. And he's just speaking plainly of his experience, and they don't really know what to do with that. I hope that this has happened to everybody here, but when you have a profound conversion experience, maybe you're looked at a little bit differently. Because again, in this gospel reading, everybody's looking at this blind man and saying, is that the same guy? He looks a little different. One, probably because he can see, but somehow there tends to be a quality about a person that's different after an experience of suffering. And the prime example of all of that is what we're going to celebrate on Easter Sunday, when Jesus rises from the dead and appears to many different people, and at first they can't recognize him because the suffering that he endured transformed into something more glorious than could be recognized. I don't like suffering. I'm sure none of us really do. But there can be such a grace that happens if we can endure suffering well. There are some sufferings in the world that we need to eradicate to the best we can, either our own personal suffering or the suffering of those out there in the world. That's why we're a community, to support one another and to support those outside of these walls. But the good news is that even through suffering, there can be new life. That at one point in life when we're looking at something and saying, this is the darkest time I've ever experienced, that after the fact, it can ideally be a moment of enlightenment, that I can see the world differently, that I can realize that even in the terrible things that I've endured, that God is real, that he loves me, and that suffering was ultimately for his glory and for my building up, just like it was for this blind man. Wherever you're at in your life and your heart right now, we all have our major and minor sufferings, and I just want to ask and invite you to hold out hope that those all are for a purpose, to show the glory of God.